Encounter at Farpoint is easily one of the most significant episodes in television history, not necessarily one of the best episodes of Star Trek or even of The Next Generation. It's not even a particularly great pilot episode compared to, say, Game of Thrones or Mad Men, though I would say, in terms of creative decisions, rewatching this nearly 40 years later, there's a lot in this episode that lays the groundwork for plot and character for The Next Generation and even for later series as late as Picard Season 3. For the moment, I'll go back to the wider significance. Encounter at Farpoint is the start of a 17-year continuous run of new Star Trek on television. The stats for this run are impressive. 4 series, 25 seasons of television, and these next figures were basically worked out on a beer mat, so correct me if I'm wrong. 624 episodes, 457 hours or 27,000 minutes of storytelling. Like I say, they're rough calculations, but what other franchises have lasted anything like this long? There's Law and Order, the various Chicago series, probably some reality series as well. If we expand it out beyond the 17 years to the original series, the movies, and the post 2005 abominations, Star Trek is, by any measure, a huge franchise. However much you might love the original crew, it's TNG that was the biggest success, that got the ratings, that's basically the jewel in the crown of the whole thing. Encounter at Farpoint is the start of that. So that's the legacy. I'm going to talk a bit about the plot, but mostly in terms of the immediate and long-term effects this episode had on the direction of the show. I guess that will mainly be in terms of the characters, and finally anything else I can think of. The early installment weirdness, the visuals, the costumes. As this is the pilot, Encounter at Farpoint is about getting the gang together and having an adventure to get to know them a bit. We open on Jean-Luc Picard, newly appointed as commander of the Enterprise D, arriving on the ship and tasked with going to the planet Deneb 4, which is the edge of explored space, agree a trading deal with the locals, and have a look at their space station, which seems to be suspiciously compatible with Federation requirements. Already on board the ship are Councillor Deanna Troi, Security Chief Tasha Yar, Lieutenant Worf, and the android Data. Waiting to board the ship at Farpoint Station itself are First Officer William Riker, Engineer Geordi LaForge, Medical Officer Beverley Crusher, and her son Wesley. Once everybody meets up, and I will circle back and get to the Q stuff later, the crew must investigate what's going on with Farpoint. Riker has a chat with the shifty and nervous Groppler Zorn, and notices some stuff appearing out of nowhere, as if his wishes are being granted when he voices them. Down in the lower levels of the station, Troi feels a sad presence. Geordi, a talented engineer, is at a loss to explain what the station is actually made of. This part of the plot, the mystery of Farpoint Station, builds to an actually quite sweet and tender resolution. I'm kind of skipping through the actual episode itself quite quickly because I guess what I want to talk about is the characters. The mystery of Farpoint Station works fine as an episode of Star Trek. What really impresses me is just how much of the character work that we see in this episode is consistent with the characters we get to know and love for the next 7 seasons, 4 movies, and season 3 of Picard. This works on the level of individuals, such as Data's quest to be human, but also in terms of dynamics between characters, like Picard and Beverley Crusher. There are exceptions to this rule. Councillor Troi, for example, gets some good episodes later in the series. But here, she gets to emote a lot, feeling the emotions of the entity, and beyond that, we just get to learn she already knows Riker somehow, which the two of them don't seem to reveal to Picard. Seems like an HR issue waiting to happen. The Troi and Riker relationship never quite worked for me, particularly in contrast to Picard and Crusher. In this episode, we learn Crusher is a widow. Her husband was close friends with Jean-Luc. They haven't seen each other for years. Picard is concerned that working with him might be difficult for Crusher, but she says, chill out bro, it'll be cool. So for these two, we establish the backstory, we have a little bit of character work in the episode, we establish Picard's awkwardness around children. It's all broad strokes, so there's lots for them to explore, and which is explored in later episodes. All evolves naturally from what happens here. So Picard Season 3, literally decades after Encounter at Farpoint, is able to use Encounter at Farpoint in a creative way. Maybe you don't agree, but personally, I think that's quite impressive. Troi and Riker don't get this minimum of backstory. We don't really know any details of what happened between them before they met on the ship. So, despite nods to it at various points, their relationship never really achieves the sense of depth that Picard and Crusher do. Even the small breadcrumbs never really get explored very much. What really is an Imzadi? Couldn't we have at least got one episode out of that concept, perhaps? Another relationship that gets a strong start is between Picard and Riker. Picard tests his new number one by making him reconnect the saucer section to the battle bridge, the only time we've seen this done on screen. The sequence is a little bit cheesy with the swooping theme tune. It establishes Riker's competence to the satisfaction of senior staff. We get a discussion of Riker's command philosophy, and Picard asks for his help with the presence of children on the ship. So there's the beginnings of a mutually respectful partnership there, rather than Jean-Luc just being the boss of him. I also liked the short scene down on Farpoint Station where Crusher dismisses Riker's concerns about weird things happening as those of a thirsty ensign. Another nice apparent throwaway that helps contrast the stolid captain with the energetic first officer. How about the other characters? Data gets a solid intro. We get that he's, how to put it, not socially awkward as such, but capable of going down the wrong rabbit hole, as for example when he defines a word over excessively. His scene with Admiral McCoy is classic Bones McCoy, acknowledging to the audience that Data is kind of the Spock of this new series, which makes McCoy the perfect character to pair with him. The Data Riker scene that simultaneously introduces the holodeck, Data's quest to be human, his physical strength, Riker's reaction of almost childlike joy of seeing what Data is, contrasts those two characters nicely and builds up both of them as well. There's lots of these little moments sprinkled throughout the episode, sowing seeds of what's to come. Obviously, not all of them came to fruition. Tasha Yar gets something. She grew up on a tough world. A couple of times, she talks about tests and being tested. Obviously, Tasha doesn't last that long in the series, and I'm kind of in two minds about her leaving. If she'd hung around until season 3, when the next generation gets really good, would we have got much more out of her character? Obviously, there are a few later Tasha Yar episodes, but overall, I wonder if Tasha Yar is more of a Deep Space Nine character than a Next Generation. Is Tasha Yar the Pete Best of the Next Generation, and that would make Worf Ringo, I guess? Overall, I think I see Yar as a lost opportunity. Imagine her, for example, in the Cardassian episodes in the last couple of seasons of TNG and early DS9. And Geordi, we get to learn about his visor a little bit. Not much more than Tasha Yar, to be honest. That's the main characters. I'm going to circle back and talk about the early section of the episode where Picard joins the ship and is on the way to Farpoint. That means talking about Q. It really is quite difficult to imagine the Next Generation without Q, who was apparently a late addition to the script. Q enables the whole trial of humanity thing, which gets called back in the series finale, All Good Things. As much as humanity is supposed to be perfect in Star Trek, Q is like this wonderful spanner in the works, this fly in the ointment that enables the main characters to examine themselves as individuals, as a species, and in some instances to react more emotionally. Look at Picard just in this episode. We go from him being very uncomfortable sometimes to shouting at Q to get off my ship and smiling about how they've got more adventures to look forward to. Q is this huge catalyst at important points, and it's like the character arrives fully formed, ready to just be this trickster, prankster, Loki type who can do and say silly things and yet somehow remain a credible character. If, for example, you showed someone who'd never watched Star Trek the costumes that John Delancey wears in this episode, the soldier, the explorer, the judge, they look ridiculous, but they work so well in the context of what Q is saying, of the argument he's trying to make about humanity's flawed nature. Like Picard says, Q's arguments are old. He touches on things like original sin. Q is smart enough to know when he's just making something up. I'm saying that Q might not actually believe his argument. He might have serious intent with the whole trial of humanity thing, or he might just be a cosmic being having fun with the hairless monkeys. Next, let's talk about visuals. The sets, like parts of Farpoint, the engineering section, and some props, are repurposed from the original movies and the series. For example, the battle bridge is from Search for Spock. Looking back from the 2020s, the early TNG seasons look much more like the original series than the eventual Next Generation DS9 Voyager aesthetics established by the end of TNG, particularly in terms of the uniforms, which do kind of look strange and uncomfortable. Of course, there's early installment weirdness, which is maybe unavoidable when you're creating a whole new world to tell stories in. I already mentioned the timeline stuff in Q's trial. Some of the dates and events mentioned seem incompatible with later on-screen stuff, but honestly, the whole concept of the trial of humanity works so well, I can just let it go. On the battle bridge, we've got Miles O'Brien, future Deep Space Nine regular, as an ensign, where later on, O'Brien is not in the officer corps. The special effects do look a little bit dated, particularly the net that Q captures the Enterprise early on in the episode. And when we see the eventual secret of Farpoint Station, I'd say it's cute and charming enough. Encounter at Farpoint does the job in terms of a pilot episode. It gets the characters together, shows us a little about them, sets up the premise to get things going. I think it's got better with the benefit of time. Some of the early reception wasn't great, with Marina Sirtis even going so far as saying they bloody hated us, to sum up the early reaction. Another way they do this well, which I've already kind of touched on, is the handover scene. It's just long enough. It doesn't even mention McCoy by name. There's a brief bit of emotion and then it's on with the new people. Just enough to acknowledge the legacy and the nostalgia that the show is tapping into. So as well as that nod to the past with McCoy, I think we've also got a nod to the future. And I'm talking about the scene Wesley Crusher gets a brief tour of the bridge. And there's this very unusual for Star Trek at least, this point of view shot that ends with Picard saying something like, "Welcome, Wesley." And for me, it's like the viewer's introduction to the bridge as well, just taking a minute to almost break the fourth wall and invite the fans into this new thing. I wish more current series would maybe invite the old fans into the new thing. So that's my thoughts on Encounter at Farpoint. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again. Have a great day.